In this video, we're going to check out a private collection of Mopars, mostly from the muscle car era, including some old drag racing stuff, which I love, and a 74 Charger sunroof car that's supposedly one of 16 built. So this collection of cars is based out of Tennessee, and the guy sells parts from these things. These are active parts cars that he is stripping down and selling out, and he's all the time buying new stuff and replenishing his inventory. So I had the chance to walk around, explore some of his old relics and some of the things that he stripped down, some of his projects, some of his cars that he actually gets out and drives, and I thought you guys would probably enjoy it. So we're going to start in the back of the property and work our way forward, and we're starting back here with an early Plymouth Barracuda. Now these things just, you hardly ever see them anymore. That huge back glass, the really distinct body lines on these cars. These cars are really cool, seldom seen. They're hard to restore because there's not many parts, which makes a car like this very handy as a parts car. So you'll see it's got trim in the back. It's still got the back glass intact, which is pretty unusual. It's got a lot of good trim pieces all around. The windows is good, but for the most part, the body work on this car is pretty rusty. And you'll see back here on the quarter panel that somebody has patched this thing up and fixed it from some kind of wreck and used quite a bit of Bondo back here. But that was pretty normal back in the day, before we had all the technology and replacement parts and things like that to replace the whole quarter panel. Sitting next to it is another little A-body Mopar. Now these Dodge Dart and Plymouth Valiant cars, they made a ton of them, especially the little four doors. There's a bunch of them out there. But you can't just call up any parts manufacturer and get parts for these cars. They are really hard to restore. So a car like this serves a great purpose as a parts car. And you'll see this one's had a recent paint job, somewhat recent. But up front here, it's been pretty much all stripped down. You can see all of the inner fenders, the suspension is all disassembled. Obviously no engine or transmission in this thing. It's pretty much gutted as far as the firewall forward. And here's a little bit later A-body four-door car. This one's a little more complete, but you can see it's pretty rough. The hood is just completely mangled, but it's got a slant six still in there. The interior still got plenty of pieces, door panels, the seats in there. The dash has been stripped. Some of the windows have been busted out. You know, that's just what happens when one of these cars sits in somebody's yard or in a junkyard. Rear end's gone. Bunch of the tail pieces and back bumper is gone. No tail lights. But there's still a bunch of usable stuff on this car. So he's going to continue stripping it down, getting these little trim pieces off and these little nuggets that people can use to restore their car. Now back here is a row of Plymouth Dusters, and there's actually one Dodge Demon back here, which is pretty hard to find these days. So these Dusters, these cars were pretty much just economy cars. They didn't make a whole lot of performance packages out of the Dusters and Demons, but they're still really cool. They still have a lot of interchangeability, and this one is a good example of something that's been completely gutted. There's hardly anything left of it, but it's got some decent doors. It's got a few pieces still hanging in there, but for the most part, the chassis and structurally, this thing is not suitable for restoration. So it's a good parts car. Sitting next to it is a Dodge Demon. You can see the back section has been cut off of this car completely. And that's because Dodge Demons had a completely different taillight section than the Plymouth Duster, and it's really hard to find. So if somebody's restoring a car, they probably need that section if the car's been wrecked or had rust issues. And you can see this one's got a few parts laying in it, a couple of seat pieces, couple of other little random pieces, but for the most part this thing is rusty and it's rough. But look at this. This is the little treasure that I always like to look for. This is a hood that was on a race car, and you can see this is a hand painted 340 wedge on the corner of the hood. You can see they had a little hole cut in the hood, and you can also see where they've pop riveted a scoop on there. So that's a really cool piece to me. That's like the little piece of treasure out of a rough old car. Sitting next to it is another old Duster, and look how rusty this thing is. The frame rails are completely rotten, but somebody used the cowl panel and the A-pillars and part of the roof to restore their car. You can see somebody's also used parts of the quarter panels and that tail light section for this car. So even a rusty old car like this that needs metal work, it needs repairs, it can serve a purpose for somebody who's restoring one of these cars. So this one, it's pretty well stripped out. There's not a whole lot left of it. Floor pans are rusty, a lot of rusty pieces, but you'll see another piece of that Duster drag car that we saw earlier, that hood, this is the fender off of that car. So see, hand-painted lettering, Duster 340, the wedge is hand-painted, old school decals, or at least remnants of decals, and even this piece has been parted out. You can see the bottom of that fender's been cut off, and again, that's serving a purpose to restore another car. So even though I kind of hate to see some of these old pieces of drag racing treasure get used like this, that's what parts cars and junkyards are all about. Here's another old Duster. This one's got a fairly decent body on it. It's still got a few windows in it, and you can see back here, you know, the taillight section is still intact, except it's been wrecked. That's probably why it hasn't been cut up yet. The back section of this car had a pretty good lick. You can see the quarter panel, but the glass is still good. It's still got a windshield in it, even though it's not really usable anymore. But you can see that this thing has been stripped out as far as the suspension is concerned. Not a whole lot left as far as structure. Speaking of structure, look at this thing. This is a Dodge Dart that has been completely cut from basically like the transmission forward. There's no cowl, there's no anything ahead of like where you'd have your seat. And even back here, look at the quarter panel where it's been cut out. But this is pretty handy if you need to access that quarter window regulator. It's right there. Easy access to a lot of things when you cut that quarter panel off. We also had the chance to look in a couple of storage buildings that were packed full of parts. Transmissions, wheels, tires, torque converters, just a little bit of everything that can be used in project cars. Stuff that he can sell, stuff that he can use on his own projects. So he's been collecting this stuff for years. Now here's a really rare piece. This is a 1974 Dodge Charger roof. And what makes it special is it is a factory sunroof car, making this a really valuable piece to his collection. Now here's a really rough one. This is like a mid-60s Dodge Cornet or Plymouth Belvedere. These mid-60s Mopars made for some really good race cars back in the day, both as stock cars and as drag cars. And this thing you can see is pretty rough. It's been stripped out. It is rusty. There's not a whole lot left of it, but you'll see back here, it's got a set of super stock springs underneath the back of it, which is probably worth just as much as the whole car itself. So this is another one of those pieces that it's got parts in here. There's different things that he can sell and strip off of here, but he's got plans to use those super stock springs on another project. You definitely don't see very many E-bodies that are in this type of condition. Most of these cars have been either restored or scrapped or used for parts. This one doesn't have a whole lot of useful stuff left over on it, but you can see that somebody has actually fixed this car previously. You can see the underlying paint on this thing. It was a blue car originally, but you can see that they've put a green door on it. They actually replaced the quarter panel on this car, and then of course it got wrecked again. So this thing, not a whole lot left. The cowl panel's gone. The roof is just absolutely trashed. But check it out. It's got doors. It's got at least a few usable parts. There's a door panel that's pretty hard to find. Even though it's rusty, even though it's rotten, this car is serving a purpose. You can see the floors and basically the front frame rails, everything, the firewall's gone completely, probably been used on another car. And then up here on the roof, the vinyl top, of course, always causes rust problems. But back here, not a whole lot of salvageable pieces, but still pretty cool to look at. Check out this little Dodge Dart GT. Now it's rough. It's definitely had some accidents up front here. The front fenders, the hood, all that's pretty rough. Windshield's busted out of it. But this thing still has some pretty cool potential. Underneath, rusty floor pans like normal. Nothing really dramatic though. But the bad part is back here. This quarter panel is absolutely killed. But we'll make our way around here. It's still got some pieces. It's got tail lights. It's got that rear trim panel. Even though it's rough, it's still there. Deck lid's intact. Still got a back glass in it. Still got trim around it. So, you know, still good usable parts on this car. And of course, I always like the little emblems, like a GT emblem. That's kind of a rare piece to have hanging out there. And, you know, the rest of this thing, you know, it's just a parts car, but look here, it's got an engine in it, V8 engine. It's got parts and pieces that can be used as power steering, power brakes, and a little tiny 2-barrel carburetor, but still, really neat piece. And it looks like this was actually a factory air car. Looking at those hoses and stuff, that's a pretty rare combination of parts. Now here it is. This is the rarest piece in this collection of Mopars. This is a 1974 Dodge Charger. If we look right here, it's got a factory sunroof option. Now we don't have official production numbers on a car like this because you can break this down into who knows how many different options as far as this color. You know, this thing could be one of one, but according to the owner, this is one of 16 built. So very, very rare car. Definitely something that's desirable in the Mopar world. These factory sunroof cars are definitely something that people care about. And, you know, this is a rare piece of Mopar history. These odd options, definitely odd colors and things like that. Mopar and, you know, Dodge, Plymouth, Chrysler was known for that kind of stuff. You can see he's got the roof covered up with a hood off of another car, and that's actually a pretty rare piece too. That's a 1 year only, 1970 Plymouth GTX or Roadrunner hood. That's a pretty rare piece and it's in really good condition, but he's using it to cover up that sunroof to preserve what's left of this super rare muscle car. Now I couldn't help but notice these tires and wheels right here. Look at these super wide L6015s, road hugger belted bi-ply tires on some old Krager wheels. I love stuff like that. Now this is kind of an odd combination. This is a 1966 Dodge Dart, and it's actually got a 1964 Dodge Dart front end on it. A lot of these early A-bodies will, you know, a lot of parts interchangeability, but this one has even more strange parts on it. It's actually got some Ford pieces. He said it's got a Ford 8-inch rear end under it, which seems like an odd choice because Mopar had lots of great rear end options. It's got a Chevrolet Nova steering wheel. As we get a little closer in here, we'll see that. It's got some kind of random bucket seats out of who knows what. I see it's got an aftermarket shifter. He says it's an automatic car, but that actually looks like maybe a 4-speed stick. Another one of those cars he picked up along the way. We're not sure of its history, but it's still kind of cool to talk about, kind of cool to look at. Sitting next to it is a little more conventional. This is a 63 Dodge Polara, just a regular old 4-door sedan, but it's mostly complete aside from that windshield being gone. You can see a lot of trim, a lot of sheet metal still intact on this car. This is probably something you could get running and driving without a whole lot of trouble. The coolest part to me about this 63 is the push-button automatic transmission. Under the hood of the old 63 is pretty complete. You'll even see that this is a factory air-conditioned car. Still got all that stuff intact. This thing could make a pretty cool driver with just a little bit of work. Oh, here's some more tires. I love old tires and wheels. These Goodyear Polyglass H7014s. These are super cool for an old school muscle car, old school street machine, anything like that. Raised white letters, can't go wrong with that. Now this 4-door sedan that's got the Goodyear tires stacked up on the deck lid, this one I couldn't tell exactly what it was at first, but I did see this cool hood sitting up there. He said that's a 73 Roadrunner hood, pretty rare piece, but still couldn't tell exactly what this thing is. Figured it's mid-60s, but then I looked in the engine bay, and there it is, the plastic Certicard that the Chrysler Corporation came out with in the mid-60s. It's still intact, it's still right there, and it shows us that this is a 67 Plymouth Belvedere 2, and it had a factory 318 with an automatic and standard axle. Pretty cool to see little pieces like that that kind of help us figure out the history on these cars. Now sitting next to it is a really cool little pickup truck. This is a A100, so this is a cab forward truck. Definitely thinking outside the box, but all three of the big three were doing this in the early 60s. Chevrolet had a design similar to this, Ford had the Econoline, and then Dodge A100, which was made famous by the Little Red Wagon. It's, at least in the drag racing world, the Little Red Wagon put these trucks on the map.
This thing had like a 200-pound block of steel right here to keep the weight balance.
Yeah.
Should have seen me trying to drag that thing up on the trail. You ever seen that video on YouTube? They did it was like a commercial back in the 60s.
Yeah.
Between this and the
Where
Ford.
it would like tip up.
Yeah, the Ford would tip up and
Yeah.
the Dodge wouldn't because it had that big weight in the thing in the back of it.
Now, according to the owner, this car actually has some history in the movies. This car was used in 2 different movies through the years. It was used in Shawshank Redemption and later on in another movie, a smaller movie. But you can see this thing was destroyed, and it was also painted up to look like a police car. It had the white doors, had the little bracket on the roof for the light, state police on the hood, but this really wasn't a police car from what we can tell. And if you notice, spray painted on the back of some of his cars is Krispy Kritters. That's actually the name of his Facebook page, where you can go check out some of these cars and some of the parts that he offers for sale. Some of these things he parts out, some of them he sells complete, some of them are just parts and pieces, but definitely check out Krispy Kritters on Facebook and you'll find his page with all of these different cars and pictures and videos to check out. One of the most complete cars in the collection is this 1967 Dodge Coronet 500. These Coronet 500s were pretty optioned up cars, and this one is in pretty good shape. This is something you could actually get out on the road and drive. Look how nice the front end is, the bumper, the grill, all that stuff's in good shape. And the sheet metal on this car is pretty good. You'll notice that it's got kind of a mismatched color combination. It's been painted on several times, but inside it's got bucket seats. This thing has got a pretty rare combination of options. And if we look under the hood, it's got the factory 318 in it, and it's got, you know, just limited options in here. Nothing real fancy, nothing real special, but a car that you could actually get running and driving and put back on the road without a tremendous amount of work. Now this is a wild one. This is a little Plymouth Valiant, and check out that rear end. It's got some custom paint work on it, and you can see he's flipped the rear end to the other side of the leaf springs to raise the ride height up, giving this thing sort of the 70s street freak look. And look inside through the busted out window, and it's got plenty of interior pieces. Dash looks mostly complete, and the sheet metal on this car is decent. So, you know, this is a good start to sort of a gasser or street freak, whatever you want to call it. Front bumper's already gone, just needs some headlights in there. This front fender's been painted on a little bit, and the rest of the car, you know, this is a very fixable, very buildable car. You could have a lot of fun with a car like this. Put some little slicks on the back of it, little front runners on it. This could make a really cool one. This one is a 1971 Plymouth Scamp. This car's got some rust issues. You can see up here on the roof. Vinyl top claims another victim on this one. But pretty cool looking car. Of course, I like the black steel wheels and dog dish caps, and I like the little remnants of the Scamp decals. And, you know, this car, if you didn't mind the rust, or if you wanted to patch up the rust, you can make this car run. It's still got a slant 6 in it, an automatic transmission, and the interior is pretty complete. The dash has been robbed of a lot of parts, but still got door panels and seats. All the windows are still in it. And, you know, you could make a pretty presentable car out of something like this. Here's another cool one, 1969 Plymouth Satellite, also in green, also got plenty of rust, but a very cool looking car and very complete. So we look around on this thing on the back. You can see it's got a little dent back here on the deck lid, but some old decals that says Budweiser Racing. That's kind of cool. And then some remnants of some old body work back here on the quarter panel, and we can look into the vent window and see a pretty ratty interior, but overall, very complete car. Another one that you could make something out of if you wanted to. These cars make really good looking muscle cars. You can make them into a Roadrunner clone. You can do a lot with a Plymouth Satellite. Now this is definitely the oldest and probably my favorite car out of the whole collection. This is a 58 Plymouth station wagon. And not only is this a station wagon, it's a 9-passenger station wagon, which means it has a fold-down rear seat that faces out the back. What's going on here? What's that?
The spare tire.
Oh, I didn't know that. Man, that's cool.
You would unhook that and the spare tire went up in there.
And I guess the 9-passenger had these little steps.
Yeah. So this back window is electric. You got to roll it down, and then this pops out like a tailgate, and then the back seat folds out and faces out the back window.
Yeah. Man, that's going to be cool.
That's the power brake system on it.
Oh,
it's accordion. When you step on the brakes, that thing closes up.
I've never seen such.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's cool. Power steering, power everything.
Yeah, I'm gonna retrofit it. I got an alternator bracket to run alternator and get rid of generators. And
all the little pieces that make this thing rare and unique, they're all there. All the windows are there, all the trim pieces, the emblems. Every piece of this car is complete. This thing will crank up and drive. It is something they actually get out and use because he's got a pretty big family and he can put them all in here and take off down the road. The Dodge, Chrysler, and Plymouth cars from this era, late 50s, early 60s, they all had really cool looking dashes. This one is no different. It's got a cool looking dash panel with cool gauges and of course the push button automatic shifter over here on the left hand side. Here's another Plymouth Duster. This one is in pretty decent shape. It's been somebody's project, as you can tell by the primer and a little bit of surface rust on here, but underneath it's been stripped out. There's not a whole lot of stuff under here. Obviously no engine or transmission, No spindles or brakes on the front, it's just up on blocks. But it does have a rear end under it. You can see it's got some drag radials and steel wheels on the back. Even though they're just mocked up, they still look cool on there. This would make a cool project. Even though most of the cars in this collection are parts cars or just completely ragged or rusty, this one's actually pretty much complete aside from the engine. He recently pulled the engine out of it. He's going to put another one back in there. But you can see the front end's been painted on. This thing has been worked on off and on through the years, but it's got a lot of cool patina on the back side of the car. You can see the door's a different color. It's just a mismatched, pieced together car, but it's a Plymouth Barracuda and that cool fastback styling. This is a really neat, ratty muscle car. Another one of his projects is a 68 Dodge Dart. You can tell it's a 68 because of the little round marker lights on the side. But this thing's got some weld wheels on it. It's got a cool stance, flat black. You can't go wrong with flat black on a muscle car. And as we make our way around, you can see that it's got a pistol grip 4-speed. And this was a factory 340 car. It's still got a 340 under the hood. It's got some aftermarket parts on it, aluminum intake, 4-barrel carb, Moroso dress-up kit, headers. This thing's ready to go. Inside the garage, there's even more MOPAR treasure. There's engines, blocks, cylinder heads, a whole ton of parts and pieces. And these are kind of the keeper pieces that he's hung up on the garage wall. This is kind of like art, I guess you could say. The grills, the different things from different project cars and different memories, including that banged up grill. That was actually from a wreck that he had at the drag strip. So pieces like this, these are the things that mean something to him. These are the things that he's going to hang on to. You can see on this back wall, he's got a collection of steering wheels. He's got an old tunnel ram sitting there, and just a lot of cool stuff hanging out in the garage, waiting on another project to use them on. And if we keep going down through here, we got crankshafts, carburetors, steel wheels, got a little bit of everything. And then up on the wall, he showed me that this was an old scoop off of one of his buddy's drag cars. So it's still got the old Chrysler powered sticker on there with the Pentastar, and it's just a cool old scoop, that rectangular style and not the more modern Aero scoop. So that covers it for this private collection of MOPAR cars and parts. This guy's been collecting things for years. He has sold a bunch of parts through the years too, so he's bought and sold and traded. This is not all the cars he's ever owned, but this is his current inventory. So if you check out his Facebook page, Krispy Kritters, and that's spelled with a K, both of them spelled with a K, you will see that he's got plenty of stuff out there for sale, and he's always dragging home new projects and new parts cars. So check him out on there. If you're building a car that looks like anything in this video, definitely reach out to him. He can help you find the parts you need.